Are you a grad student or PhD thinking about blogging? Have you ever considered starting your own business based on your expertise? I'm excited to introduce you to my next guest on The Social Academic. I'm Jennifer Van Alstyne, and welcome to my blog where I share articles and interviews about managing your online presence in the academy. Today I'm talking with Dr. Chris Cloney of Dust Safety Science and the GradBlogger podcast. Chris started blogging about his dust safety research, monetized it, and now it's a full-blown independent research company working with people around the world. He joins me to talk about how he got started blogging about his research, his journey growing the business, the GradBlogger podcast, and advice for getting started. Then he answers your questions about blogging, questions from readers and listeners like you. How much content do you need to start a blog? How researched should my blog posts be? How many blog readers can I even get? What shouldn't I write about? Should I ask my supervisor? And can I write about different topics on a blog? It's all in this interview on The Social Academic. So we are now recording. Just to get us started, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Chris Cloney. I have an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from 2011. I finished my PhD in Chem-Eng 2018, and my academic research was around the physics and chemistry of explosions, specifically related to industrial safety, why they happen, how to prevent them. I have two main websites online, dustsafetyscience.com and gradblogger.com, and you can kind of jump into my story and any one of those that you want as we go.
Yeah, I'm really curious about dust safety science. You started a blog about dust safety during grad school and dustsafetyscience.com. That's now become an independent research company, which is amazing. So first, I'd like to ask, what is dust safety science and why is it so important?
Sure. So, when people think of industrial safety and explosions, if they think about it, which probably isn't that often, but when they do, they generally think of a gas explosion. So you have a release of a flammable vapor. It is allowed to collect in some area.
Right.
And it's confined when it's ignited and can lead to an explosion. My research work was in similar things, except instead of having a gas, it's a flammable or combustible dust. So if you think of your shiny MacBook Pro that you have sitting on your desk, that really high polish aluminum, when they're doing that in an industrial setting, it generates a lot, like tons and tons and tons of aluminum dust, very fine powder. And that's just as reactive as gasoline, especially if it gets, again, thrown up into the air, then it can cause a sort of explosion to happen if it's ignited. So these are less frequent in industry, which is actually sort of a bad thing because when they happen, they're pretty severe. So people don't see them as often, don't see them as much. There's not as much understood how they happen. So that's where my research work came from academic research. Dust Safety Science, I started originally as a blog that was mydustexplosionresearch.com, which is like the worst name ever. So we'll probably get into this later, but if you're going to get started and you're worried about your name, just pick a name and go with it. You can change it later to something else.
I like that. Good tip.
That's what it built out of that. So our mission there is to see a year with zero fatalities worldwide from these type of industrial accidents by 2038. And we generate a lot of programs and projects in order to start to make that happen online.
That's such a concrete goal, and it sounds like it's really grown from the time when you started, not just the name, but what you're doing with it. I'm curious, why did you get started blogging?
Yeah, so when I finished my undergrad, I started my graduate degree, which was a master's back then, and I eventually transferred into the PhD program. But I also started working full-time with a consulting company and a software development company in this field of explosion modeling. Doing computer simulations of these type of explosions to explain them. And it was awesome. I loved it. It was really great for a while. I promoted early. I had, great publications, scholarships. Was just really excited. The work was really intellectually stimulating, we'll call it, i.e. hard, I guess, but I enjoyed that. But, after 4 years, we as a company, I was doing 60, 70-hour work weeks for a long time.
That's so much.
We kind of get hit by oil and gas pretty bad as a company. So that put pressure on our team, on myself, on the projects we were doing. It became less where it was appreciated that you were there 60, 70 hours. And it's like, you have to be here 60, 70 hours or we're kind of going backwards. And so after a couple of years of that, 2016, after being in that role for about 5 years, doing my graduate work at the same time,
Yeah.
I did one of the scariest things I ever did and put in my resignation letter and quit that job. To finish my PhD was really the goal. If I had to stay in the job, I probably would have took the full 10 years of my university lots to do my PhD. But
well, working that much, I'd imagine you'd probably have to.
Yeah, I mean, it was good.
That's
it was
a lot.
really aligned for a while. Like I said, but just, you know, as things got harder at the job, it got harder to get into the PhD work.
Of course.
So when I left there, when I quit, I was focused on my PhD. I was always looking at self-development and entrepreneurship. I tried to start a couple companies. I was listening to like the Founder podcast by Nathan Chan and this whole startup culture. And I know you do entrepreneurship work as well. That whole, you know, get funding and start a business and get a bunch of capital together. Like it's one hard, two, now that I know that there's a different way, not a good way to do it. So I started listening to things like Pat Flynn and Smart Passive Income back in 2016. I started blogging. I started a couple of blogs about gluten-free eating, about just random things, and none of them really worked. You know, some sites didn't get built. And eventually I got kind of fed up and just like, well, I'm going to blog about what I do every day, which is this research on dust explosions. Nobody's probably going to care. It turns out, you know, only a few people actually cared at the end of the day, but it was enough people to care. And the topic's important enough that we're actually making some pretty meaningful change in the world today with our business.
Amazing.
So kind of
Oh, I'm especially interested because you said that you started trying to blog about other topics that you thought that people wanted to read about and that they would be interested in. But what you found really took hold was what you were interested in and what you were working on every day. That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like trying to split yourself, right? If you're trying to be this other person and write about interesting stuff. The stuff I was interested in was these papers I was reading, these textbooks I was reading, and on this research I was doing, and the impact it actually had on the world. Once I started writing about that, then it's sort of, you know, I found the audience that resonated the most with that, and then, you know, dug in, and it's been, well, over 4 years now that we've been running that website and growing into the research company that it is today.
Yeah. Now, monetizing your blog, becoming an independent research company, it took a couple of years. What was that process like?
So the first 12 months or so was really content driven. I was just blogging, writing articles. I don't even think I started my podcast. No, I didn't start my podcast back then. I was writing articles. I started a weekly newsletter. I started writing these reports I was using as lead magnets to get people on my newsletter. It's really this phase of, you know, making connections and networking, getting to know people. And in September 2017, so I'd been at it for about a year, I started thinking, well, you know, is this something I can actually monetize as a blog? Remember, I was into entrepreneurship. I tried to start these money blogs.
Right.
I gave up and just like, I'm going to get some skills online and just write about my research. But a year in, I really thought, well, you know, there's something here. So I set a goal to make a couple $100 a month and try to figure out how to do that. And I had a couple ideas. I tried affiliate textbook sales and, you know, the normal stuff that most of us academic bloggers start with, and none of it really worked. So I went back to the drawing board. I did some research. I looked at my industry and said, well, what do people actually pay for in my industry right now? And it's happened to be that I was looking at a media company's website, you know, that does magazines and online publishing, and there's all these advertisers everywhere. It's like, well, okay, this site has, you know, so much traffic, probably an order of magnitude or even more higher than mine, but I know there's advertisers on there. So I set this goal of $200 a month. I emailed a company and said, hey, I have a newsletter. I knew they were on the newsletter, so we'd interacted back and forth. So would you pay $200 a month to put your logo at the bottom of the newsletter, like a small banner ad? They first emailed me back and said, yeah, sure, we'll do it. Just contact our marketing manager and go through it. And I was like, oh, I forgot to put in the email that it like has a cost associated with it. So I emailed them back and said, well, there is a price. You got to go to the website to see the price and that. And he's a good friend of mine now. We've grown together over the years, but he said, oh, of course there is. Just tell my marketing manager and she'll organize it. Marketing manager emailed me back and said, yeah, we'll take a year. And I was like,
That's amazing. And that was your first attempt at kind of trying to figure out advertising, correct?
yeah. And it was one email, and it would have been a $2,400 sale. But I said, no, it's obviously a price too low. So I gave them 3 months, and then we started upping the newsletter advertising from there and going down a
Nice.
couple different routes. But that was the first dollar, $10 and a couple $100 I made online was just from that one newsletter ad on a small newsletter. Newsletter had 250 people on it.
And what I like about what you're saying is that it took trial and error. It took looking at other things that you had heard of, that you'd been researching, to figure out what was actually going to work for your industry and for the people who are reading your newsletter and reading your website.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
So I asked why you started blogging, and now that the blog is a business and makes money, of course I understand the financial motivation for it. But I'd love to hear, what's something else you get from it? What's something positive that you get from sharing your research and connecting with people through dustsafetyscience.com?
Yeah, I mean, financials obviously, an important aspect of it. It is my life. It's my sole employment right now. Actually, it has been my sole employment for the last 4 years. I work from home. I get to see my son grow up. I support my wife, who is a very busy person herself. She's in medical school now. She's done medical school. She's a resident now. But we've grown together through that whole process.
Yes, of course.
Me working 70 hours and her going through medical school. So financials, one amazing aspect of it, but there is a lot more. And there's two things I really think that, I get really excited about. One is the connections I'm making, and this independent research company. I see it as really my journey to become self-tenured. So I'm building a profitable business so that I can do the research and make the change I want in the world. We set this big goal, the 0 fatalities by 2038. The question is how to achieve that. And what we do is I talk with people around the world and say, well, what is the biggest driver of these incidents in your industry, in your country? And what's the biggest driver of fatalities? This leads to a lot of partnerships. We have partnerships in Canada, US, Sweden, Brazil, Germany, elsewhere in the world. And this is really exciting. I mean, I basically built sort of a university research program that's funded through a profitable business.
That's amazing.
That I get to decide the direction of the research on.
Yeah, it's the thing that you're most interested in, that you've been interested in this entire time. And now you've found a way to connect with people all around the world and actually hear what they need and what their problems are right now, so you can figure out where to go forward.
Yeah, and I'll give you two stories, like kind of demonstrating that. So in mid 2018, I had a gentleman, Ali Ajnadawi, in the country of Jordan, and they had a large grain silo explosion there, and he was trying to figure out safety protocols. And in the US, in the 70s, they had very large grain silo explosions as well, and they figured out some protocols. So I passed them those protocols along. They've actually integrated that into the country to their inspection programs. But I asked him how he heard of me, like where did he come across this in the first place? And he said, by this point, I had started a podcast on dust explosions, if you can imagine. And he said, well, actually, I teach at the local university here. I make my students in process safety listen to your podcast every week. A classroom of 30 students in Jordan. And then now they're reaching out to figure out best practices on a government level for industrial safety. This gives you an idea of the extent to which this can happen if you put yourself out there, be willing to start a podcast about your research. And just last week, I had a lady on in Brazil, Monica. She said she's taking all the training we're putting out through the Dust Safety Academy, which is another part of our business, translating into Portuguese and using it as training material down there for workers. So it is far reaching. That's kind of the really cool part about it.
Yeah.
So that's my journey to become self-tenured. The other part that I really enjoy about it is this whole building a business is a part of it. It's a challenge. It's hard every day. There's a lot of steps involved. There's a lot of mental mind work you need to get through to do that. But the other part of that is I'm building a really awesome team, and I just love them so much. We have a content manager, we have a technical writer, we have a designer that does all the work for us, and we've had a team of probably 4 core people and another 4 support staff, like podcast editor and things. it's just amazing seeing them, and especially in this time that we're in now when we're recording. It's mid 2020, and we have COVID-19 going on. A lot of people are getting laid off, and it's really amazing to be working with a team where we're all throughout Canada. We're in different provinces, but each one of us are not worried about in terms of financials because we have this business that's running what we're doing. We have this mission that we're striving for. So that is, the other thing that really lights me up about building a sort of business is the technical know-how about how to build a business, but all this also, having a team, growing a team, getting everyone aligned and providing that vision on this change that we want to see in the world.
And also that your team is remote. You said that you work from home, right?
Yeah, we all do. So we have a couple folks here in Nova Scotia in the East Coast Canada where I'm at, a couple people in Central Canada, one in the Philippines, a designer, developer in India. So distributed around the world.
Amazing. I do want to bring up GradBlogger because that's how I found you. That's how we connected through your Twitter. So now that you have created dustsafetyscience.com, you help other grad students and PhDs do the same thing with the GradBlogger podcast, where your goal is to help 1,000 academics each change 1,000 people's lives through online business. That's amazing. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we started GradBlogger.com a couple of years ago. I started on my own, and now, myself and the team all work towards it. But it really was born out of just starting in general. I was very active in academic entrepreneurship circles. We were doing masterminds, group calls, emails, coffee chats with folks you've done these sort of chats with before, 4 years ago when I was trying to figure out the starting business. So it's always been working with academics, trying to figure this stuff out together. I always sort of found that I was better at the business system part of stuff. That's where my inclination came in. And you can see, not we're doing this audio wise, but Jennifer can see the bookshelf on the back. I have all these, business books and building all that up. So there's that. I've been kind of in that area for quite a long time. But I came across this quote, and it was actually on the Smart Passive Income podcast back when I was listening to that quite frequently. I don't listen to it as much anymore, but I was back then. And Pat said something like, you don't need to be an expert to build an online business. And it just kind of clicked in my head that it's like, what if you were?
Right.
What if you were the world leading expert in the field and you can combine, marketing chops with building a profitable business into what you're doing? What kind of change could you actually implement in the world if you go ahead and do that? And that's really what sparked and lit me up for Dust Safety Science and coming up this big kind of grand goal for it. But it's also really what made me realize that in order to have a bigger impact, if I can get other academics doing the same things in their areas of expertise, and kind of create this little mini army of folks that know what they're doing, but also aren't scared to put themselves out there, grow online businesses, get better at marketing, get better at putting themselves out there, not stay in the ivory tower and actually make some change. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that come up. Confidence to share online is obviously one. Not sure what to create, how much to create, nervous about being vulnerable, nervous about what people are going to think about them. And there's the business building side. So, selling systems, getting comfortable with selling, becoming and staying profitable, looking at finances, building processes and team. There's a couple areas there. And that's really the stuff that I cover every day, every week at the GradBlogger podcast and on GradBlogger.com is part my journey, part best practices, part getting the right mindset to be able to start to make some of this stuff happen.
Yeah, mindset is a really important part of that. If you're not in the right mindset, why would you even be interested in learning about any of the things you just mentioned that are so necessary for business? And I think that's great that that's something that you do focus on in the podcast. I bet a lot of people that come to you are just starting to approach that, and all of a sudden they're like, "Whoa, there's so much to do. What do I start with?" And your podcast is there to help.
I mean, it's both. We do, coaching and things through GradBlogger where people they've gotten over the content creation hump, but they haven't gotten over the hump of, selling something and selling a service or a product and figuring out what that is and doing the market research. Then yes, there's people that are still trying to pick their blog name, and they've been at the blog name thing for 6 months or 6 years. I'm like, my first blog was my first blog was nsgfbox.com, Nova Scotia gluten-free box.com. So and that blog didn't go anywhere. But my first real blog was mydustexplosionresearch.com, which we rebranded a couple of years ago. So you can get hold, if you let the mindset stuff get a hold of you too hard, too strongly, then you just may never start. And the real truth of it is you have to start to get the practice to get good at what you need to do to kind of hone your craft.
Very true. So thank you for inviting questions from social academic readers and listeners. I do have some good ones. So first up is from someone who's concerned about how much time they have. They're a PhD student and they want to know, how much content should you have prepared to start a blog?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a pretty common one too. And the thing I want to hone in on is why is it important to create content when you get started? And you think it's important because, you need that to get traffic and you need to get to your website, but that's actually not true. It's important to create content because you need to get good at sharing. You need to get good at sharing written, audio, video, whichever your medium is going to be. It's like, building muscles at the gym. The biggest key is to do something consistent, whatever it is. If you spend 6 months trying to figure out your workout plan, but you never actually go to the gym because you've been thinking about how many posts should I have or how many how many pieces of content should I have, you actually need to exercise the muscle. That's the key. So consistency is more important. I started with 0 posts. I've been at it 4 years. I've done everything from writing every day. I did 40 posts in 56 days to 1 guest post a month, just accepting other people's content for the site, to nothing for months on end. Last year, we have a full systemized content creation process. We did over 600 posts on dustsafetyscience.com last year. So did the whole gamut. There's no really one way to start other than need to get started. So if you can get your site up and be doing, 1 to 4 posts a month, so, once a month to 4 a week, that's probably where most people would be starting. It was cool back when I started to do 1 post a day to show you were tough or something. Don't do it. It's
too tough.
I did it, but it will cause you to burn out. The whole thing is, it's just like it's like going to the gym and working that content, that shipping muscle. If you listen to Seth Godin, you need to go do that and practice creating content and pressing the ship button, putting it to the world. And it's like the gym. Like I said, if you spend 6 months coming up with your plan before you actually go to the gym, it's probably better to go, walk on the treadmill or go lift a light weight or something in those 6 months instead of keep doing your planning.
Great answer. Okay, so this reader says that her question is about the research, the reason she stopped blogging. She says, I've always struggled with an internal pressure to put certain posts that are researched and formal. I wonder how to get over that or straddle the line between presenting research to a general audience.
Yeah, I mean, this is a mindset thing, right? It's also a tough one. The first question is probably, why do you feel that way? But we don't have the listener here to dig into that. So I'll go past that and we'll dig into it a little bit. There's an answer to this that is what most people are going to want to hear. And that's something like, you can be rigorous and share your stuff and, still be academically valid. And that may make you feel like it's a valid answer. It's probably not gonna get you doing any better blogging at the end of the day. The way I like to look at it, there's a quote from Tim Ferriss's book. I think it's 4 Hour Workweek. If this was easy, what would it look like? So if you ask, well, this question, it's all the stress and pressure to be academically correct and have it well researched and formal. If it was easy to just get yourself, like, if you just imagine yourself, you were just doing this and they were just flying out of you, what would that actually look like? At the end of the day, it's probably that you don't feel so much tension about all this academic rigor that you need to put into your posts. It's probably about creating, something that feels good. So do something that you're liking, that you're like to write about, that there's not as much stress about. And I mean, I struggled with my first couple of posts. I did these highly researched. I got really nice images. I created them, and I use PowerPoint to create my images still, but I'm sure there's better graphics programs that people can use. But, I spent a lot of time doing this. At the end of the day, I said, this is just too hard. So if you are struggling with this, I like to develop a process to make it easier. So when I did the 40 posts in 56 days, it was paper reviews. So every time I read a paper, I probably have some beside me here, I just wrote down the back of it as I was reading 3 main points, a couple bullet points about the methodology, the main finding, and any other papers I could link it to just on the back of the paper, just like you do when you're in grad school.
So you gave yourself a constraint, like a writing constraint.
And then when I created my post, I'd literally just take a piece of paper off the stack, turn it over, there's my summary, and I'd write the post from that information. And that allowed me to, be able to create these and still have scientific rigor if you're still concerned about that. Although that's not the crux here. If you figure out the scientific rigor thing and you haven't dealt with the mindset stuff, you're probably still going to struggle at blogging at some point. But you can do these processes to make it more efficient. I could do, one of these posts in an hour and a half, including up online, metadata tagged image in, all that sort of stuff, because I came with this very strict process to do it.
Great. Another person would like to know, how long does it take to build up a following? How many readers can I even get?
Yeah, really good question. I'd say the starting point for this is, if you show up, people are going to pay attention. So let's forget about the blog for a sec. Like if you're active on Twitter and you just follow some hashtags, and every day you look at those hashtags, you see who wrote them, or you may follow, a handful of 5 people, 10 people, and you just, you're retweeting them, you're putting educated comments in, you're providing helpful information. Eventually people are going to pay attention to you. So that's how easy it is to build a following on Twitter. You do that for a week, you do that for a month, you do that for 6 months. That's how easy it is to build a following. It's to care, to show up, and to be helpful. So if you apply that same thing to your blog, it's same thing: care about your audience, show up, actually post, and be helpful. And if you do that long enough, you'll start to build a following. So what does it take? That's it. You just need to show up and actually create content. It's a lot easier in the Twitter example. It seems like it's less of a, less of an effort. And it is less of an effort to tweet than to build a blog. But if you're committed to doing this, that's the kind of stuff they're gonna have to do. And you probably see it, Jennifer, with your work. I mean, you're writing, you're putting a lot of content. You're doing this guest content as well.
It definitely takes showing up and engaging with the people who read my blog and who are following me on social media but not reading my blog. I have both types of people that are in my larger community, and I think that meeting people where they're at is a big part of it, and figuring out what they're interested in by talking to them is really what's helped me gain more interest in people who are reading my stuff.
Yeah, it's about being top of mind when somebody thinks about something. So
yeah,
like I've literally had a buffer post go out every day for 4 years on LinkedIn on a dust explosion incident. And it's the backbone of our content system that allows us to create the 600 posts last year. But I started just with Google Alerts on some keywords and just put them in a list, got the articles every week, and then tweeted or LinkedIn message out the articles or LinkedIn post out the articles. I don't know what the right words are to use on LinkedIn for social media sharing, even though I've been doing this for 4 years. But every day a post shows up on LinkedIn. And I go to a conference, somebody says, I follow you on LinkedIn.
Because every day there is something that's important to them, news that's important to their own interests and their own research or work that you're sharing. So, yeah.
And then, so the second part of that is how many, readers can I even get? It really depends on your industry. Are you in a really niche industry like me doing dust explosions? Are you in, maybe you're doing social media research, which, would be a bigger industry. In the online business industry, if you will, it's called a vanity metric. I try not to use the buzzy terms too much, but that's one that is. It doesn't mean anything. I made my first $250 online when we had maybe 30 readers a day, maybe 1,000 people coming a month. We broke, $10,000 a month in revenue when we had around 5,000 visitors. I know people that have 5 and 10 times more visitors than I do on my site, that are, making a couple $1,000s a year, and vice versa, people that are making a lot more off a lot less. So the question really answers, what do you want out of your blog?
Good one.
Kind of, if you really want to go down that route, it's what do you want out of it? What kind of traction do you think you can have with your readers? And then, you can do the math and figure out how many readers you want. So if you have a product that sells for $100, if you want to make $1,000 a month, you need to sell 10 products. If you think 1% of your readers are going to come through and actually buy your product, Now we're going to test my mental ability, but I forgot the numbers already. You can figure that out. I think it's either 1,000 or 10,000 people a month.
Either way, if you think about your goals and you think about your industry, you can kind of figure out what, your potential for readership in the long run. If you continue to create content, if you continue to care, show up, and be helpful.
Yeah. When I started, it was the 30. If I was like, I'm big on visualization. I visualize every monetary goal along the way, but back then I was visualizing this traffic goal. And it's always 1,000 people a month. If I get 30 people a day to come to the website, I'm king of the world. And if I can do it in industrial dust explosions, I'm sure anyone out there can do it in their industry as well. So if you got to have a number, pick 30 people a day.
Great. This reader asks, how do you ask your boss or supervisor about limits? What can't you talk about on your blog? So I guess, are there topics to avoid, and how do you decide?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I did ask my supervisor, ask is probably the wrong word. I did tell my supervisor that I was starting a blog. I guess I kind of asked, but if he had said no, then, I probably would have started anyway, but we would have figured out a way around it. But I didn't have that conversation, which is probably a good thing to do. You don't have to. I know lots of people that don't. I know people recommend that you don't. If they find out and they're upset about it, it's going to be a lot harder for you than that conversation that you could have had anyway. So it's probably good. So my conversation literally went, hey, supervisor, knocked on his door, said, hey, supervisor, you had somebody else in there. But it's like, just wanted to let you know, I started a website talking about dust explosion research. I think it's a really interesting way to share lessons learned with the broader community. And he said, just don't put my name on it.
But you heard what was important to him, which is that it was your project and not to put his name on it.
And 2 years later, I had him on my podcast finally, and he loves it.
I love that.
There are a couple things.
Did you bring up that first conversation when you were talking to him?
No. The world has changed since 4 years ago. Everyone's online now.
Yeah.
But you do need to understand your university's politics. Not politics, well, probably the politics, but the policies. Mm-hmm. Back then, there wasn't social media policies as much for universities. Today,
right.
There probably is for some of the larger ones. So you do need to keep that in mind. There's a lot of discussion in the academic field about sharing your current research, especially before it's published. My biggest thing there is, figure out what your supervisor's happy with, figure out what your university's happy with, and what you're happy with. If you can't share your own research, that's not an issue. The way you should be thinking about your blog as a researcher, the way I like to, unless your research feels really well known online, but I'd say 99% of us, that's not the case. If you grab the biggest textbook in your field and just open the table of contents and look at it and say, is there content on anything online on this, 8-page table of contents in this 500-page book? Okay, well, there's my first 150 topics that I can write about online before I talk about my research.
Right.
So don't let it deter you from getting started. They can't talk about your specific research before it's published. Once you actually get your thesis out, then put the thing on Amazon, sell it for $26, and do the whole 9 yards, create content on it. But do be responsible about it. One note I do want to say here, and it's sort of something I've seen that's gone wrong in the past, so it's probably important for your listeners to hear, is sometimes the supervisor will be so excited that they want you to create the labs blog or create the blog your research group or create on your university's website. That is all great. Maybe you can parlay them, talk them into getting a blogging course or something, set it up. But tell them, and over time, well, not even over time, tell them, and the whole goal is you need to create your own website that's your own domain as well. If you do that stuff, that's all great. Don't do your own only site on universityx.com/ this person's blog, because you don't own that. If you want to do something like what you're doing at the Academic Designer, what I've done at Dust Safety Science or at GradBlogger, you need to own that property. And
exactly,
it's can get you really tripped up if you start the wrong way at the very first. So if that does come back and they want you to do that, say, that's great, I'd love to do that, because that's some learning experience you can get. I'm also going to create my own personal website as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't really advise people on blogging because I don't know how to blog about my own research. I don't do that. I mostly blog about social media. And of course my main area of research is literature and poetry. So I'm not blogging about that. So I usually refer people to you when they're like, I need to start a blog now that I have a website. And I'm like, I can't help you with that. But one of the things that I've really found is that I don't know, people liked the idea of starting their own website on their university's page, on MLA Commons, or another type of other people are hosting your content. And it's easy because they've already set it up and you just have to input some fields. But whenever I hear from people like that, I always get concerned because you don't know how long you're going to stay there. You don't know how long that's going to be your interest. And you don't necessarily own the content that you create for it, depending on their own policies and terms and conditions. So that's also important for websites, but I'm glad that you brought it up for blogging specifically.
Yeah, a mentor of mine has had this concept that was own the race course. So whenever you create something new in your online portfolio, you need to consider whether or not you own that thing wholly and completely, and you want to make sure that the critical components you own. So your website is the most critical component. That's your home base. But it even extends in things like Facebook groups. You don't own those. They can go, and they have. I mean, I've run GradBlogger Connect for probably for 3 years now, and no one went from getting a lot of traffic to algorithm changes and making it have barely any traffic. You know, LinkedIn, even YouTube now over the last couple of years on has peeled back on the things that they're letting creators do. And even actually Amazon, I think 2 weeks ago, has cut the percentage that they're doing on their affiliate products for books and stuff as well. So if your whole business is on one of those platforms and you don't have anything going on your own platforms, on your own race course, you can end up that just going away overnight. And maybe you were making $1,000 a month and now it's gone to zero. And that's going to be kind of crappy if you're using that to support your family and stuff. So you really want to be considerate about building your assets, even if it's harder, and it is going to be harder to learn WordPress than to use somebody's hosted solution. But it's not that hard. You can figure it out. I think Jennifer's got some posts on her website that can help you get that going.
I agree, but there's like YouTube has so many trainings. It's definitely possible to learn more complicated things that end up being easier to pick up than you think. Definitely.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So my last question is actually for my fiance, Matthew. He wants to know, can you write about different subjects or topics on a blog, or should it all focus on one topic?
I mean, you can do whatever you want if you own the blog. The best frame to think about it is, it's not, and this isn't about your fiance, but it's not about you. It's about your audience. So it's for them to have multiple topics. If they're into food and you're talking about cooking and you're talking about buying food and you're talking about growing food, that's like great. It's very helpful for the audience. For me, my audiences are academic entrepreneurs and industrial safety specialists. Probably not much help to combine the two websites
right
audience. So that's the frame to think about. What's best for your audience to do. And some people do this where they maybe have their own personal website, myname.com. They blog about their life, which it's another way to do it. Maybe you can become a big Instagram influencer or something if you do that that way. But for most of us mere mortals, it's not about us. It's about our audience and what's best.
Right. That's great. So think about your audience and what they're most interested in and how you can kind of provide that with the content you're creating.
Yeah. And sometimes that can be different, It's like if your audience is about lifestyle,
right,
then, you can hit on a bunch of different topics that are related to that. But yeah, if your audience is interested in dust explosions, they don't want to hear about your new content system for creating blog posts or whatever.
Right, exactly. All right. So thank you so much for this discussion. It's been great. I do want to give a quick plug to the GradBlogger podcast. So is there anything that you'd like to say? I definitely want people to go check it out.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a lot of what we've been talking about in this interview here. I talk a lot about content creation, mindset, systems, how I blogged every day for a couple of months, why I stopped and did guest posting once a month, why I stopped forever, and how we now do 600 posts a month. So there's a lot on that content creation side, a lot on academic entrepreneurship and business systems. We bring on other academics, from around the blogosphere that are running successful businesses and do interviews with them as well. So if you're interested in that, you can find me again at GradBlogger podcast or gradblogger.com. I definitely encourage you, wherever you're tuning into this, for Jennifer's work as well, to like and share, because he's doing a great job online as well.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, if somebody's listening to this and they haven't got started and they're worried about some of these bigger things that we talked about, like how many posts and name and asking permission, that sort of stuff, you can start nobody's going to come to your website when you create it. Except your parent, your mother, if you tell them. So
Right.
You can actually do that now, like tonight. Google how to create a website in 8 minutes. I'm sure there's a YouTube video on it. There was when I got started a number of years ago, and you can create your website tonight. And that's the first step to then getting into some of these things we've been talking about in this podcast.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me, Chris. If you like this interview, be sure to give us a like and a follow. Next time on The Social Academic, I'll be talking about your options for hosting websites. We got into it a bit during this discussion, and I talk about hosts briefly in my how-to guide, but now it's time to go in depth into this long-term decision. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget, you can always find me on social media. I'm Jennifer Van Alstyne. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram at HigherEdPR. I can't wait to connect with you.